Welcome to Chaos, Logos, Order, where we apply the ideas of Jordan Peterson in order to create lives of increasingly heroic meaning. With our hosts, Guy Sengstock of thecirclinginstitute.com and Mark Michael Lewis, that's me, from the game of heroicmeaning.com. We're going through Jordan Peterson's new book, Beyond Order, chapter by chapter. In this episode, we go through chapter number 3, Do Not Hide Unwanted Things in the Fog. So welcome, Mr. Sengstock, to chapter 3. Do not hide unwanted things in the fog.
Welcome received through the fog, under the fog, within the fog.
Yes.
Thank you for welcoming.
Fog, yes. Or fog, no, as the case may be.
Right. Yes.
So I thought I'd start defining the fog.
Yeah.
Right, just this idea that we shouldn't hide unwanted things in the fog. What is the fog? So Jordan says, the fog that hides is the refusal to notice.
Mm-hmm.
Right, to attend to emotions, motivational states as they arise.
Mm-hmm.
So it's the refusal to communicate them both to yourself and to the people who are close to you.
Yeah. Yes.
Right. The fog, it's not like it exists out there. It exists in your choices to see. It reminds me in my relationship work, I like to say that one way of doing intimacy is you can have a rule or a guideline that says share, right, everything, or do not hide in relationship. And I like to say it doesn't mean share everything. Right? Because some things aren't worth sharing. And there's an infinite amount of things to share. Like, you have to choose. And I like to say, if you think that the other person would want to know that you think that, right? You think something, and you think that the other person would want you to know that, then you share it.
Yeah.
Like that's kind of a rule that you can use to keep things clean, to invite intimacy, to invite this. And he goes into it later on in the book on relationships, how you should really focus on your relationships and invest in them. But I was thinking, it's kind of like, don't hide unwanted things in the fog. The fog is the refusal to look at your feelings, to admit them to yourself and to others. That there's an active part. He talks about omission and commission. But anyway, I wanted to start with that. I'm curious what you thought about this chapter.
Yeah, I loved it. It's surprisingly deep, right? In a way, it's a shorter chapter, right? But just when you start to really think about it, and he does a really good job of showing that another big component of the fog is that it becomes easier and easier to not notice what you're not noticing, right? The refusal becomes easier and the cost becomes higher. And that vector, that relationship of if I don't, and he uses the analogy of, I think he was talking about, if you don't like something, and you have a proclivity you don't notice it, or you refuse to say it, right? If your husband buys art, I think what it was that you don't like, and then you don't look to see if you like it, right? So you omit your real opinion about it, and so he keeps buying more art, right? And then it becomes harder because now he's like an art collector or something of that, and you're now living with some. And so to then share it after you've not shared it, can feel as though, and even literally be as though, to pull the rug out from everything, right? The cost becomes so high. And so that relationship between those two was, as I read it, and I kept thinking about it, I was like, yeah, that's really true. It's really true. And it's also true on the other end, that when you do share, and you start to notice what you notice, and when you take your friend Mark's advice and you ask yourself, would my partner like to, would my partner like me, would they like to know this about me? Would they like to would they like to know what I'm noticing about what I'm feeling or thinking? And if the answer is yes, and we start to share those things, then it's funny because especially if it's scary to share them, especially if there's resistance to sharing them, right? Because if you just start doing that, I have a feeling it's as exponential in the positive direction as it is in the negative direction, right? Because there's this whole thing about, I've noticed this, is that so recently I just handled some financial things that have been kind of over my head for a while, and it was kind of a tough choice to do this, but I just did it. And I've noticed that there was the positive benefits of handling that in my life, right? Because on some level I'd become part of the fog, right? But there's this other thing about like seeing myself as someone who just did something hard. And that one, it's like that shit, like a shift in watching yourself do something scary, right? Seems to transcend just the thing that you did, but it starts to move into, because your identity is everywhere. You always, right? So you start to like be more like that in other areas, and confront things and notice more things, and be more courageous. And so this is a deep one.
Yeah, when you were just saying that, it reminded me a bit of Vervaeke with this agent arena coupling, or this agent arena adventure, depending on how you split up the agent. That when you enact something in the world that actually impacts your understanding of who you are as an agent, that actually changes how you understand the world that you're in and how you understand the adventure that you're on, right? Your arena changes and the adventure changes when you change as an agent. And when you enact something new, all of a sudden you now tell a different story about who you are. Right?
Yes.
And call that sati or anagoge, that moment where you now feel yourself to be someone else, not necessarily a story in terms of something you say, but something that you actually be. Like you stepped into that character, you did that thing, and then you kind of look at it. And so you tell the story, and then you settle into it, and it changes.
Yes.
And you said a minute ago that there's like an infinity of good and an infinity of bad. And what I hear is it's like when you make that choice, you open up a path of I am that person more and more. Who's
and the more I'm that person, the more I'm likely to be that person, right? Yes.
Versus the opposite, which is more what he talks about in the chapter, which I have a quote for that. He uses two metaphors. One, he says it's like you don't deal with it and it just piles up in a closet. It's like the things just keep piling up and piling up and piling up into a closet until they burst out on you unwanted, and they just collapse you, and then you get overwhelmed.
Right.
But he also says, about that woman, he says, she understood that a serious discussion once initiated about this one thing, I don't like this piece of art. Right? I'm going to deal with this financial issue.
Yeah.
Right? Risked expanding to include all the things that were troublesome about our marriage.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that a real no-holds-barred battle might therefore ensue, then everything wrong might spill out.
Yes. Right.
Right? There's this danger, but if you're the kind of person, I think, what you're saying speaks exactly to what I think Jordan's major project is.
Yeah.
Right? Which is, if you choose to be the hero, if you choose to stand on the border of chaos and order, and to speak it into existence, to speak truth into existence, to not hide unwanted things in the fog, to notice the fog and then to look into it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It reminds me, so my book, The Key is in the Darkness, the story of the street lamp, where the person's looking for the key underneath the street lamp, even though they lost it someplace else, because the light's better underneath the street lamp.
Right.
This is to actually face the darkness, to face the fog. Where, if you look in the fog, it might open up. There might be a beast there. And then you have to confront the beast, and maybe it's a big beast, because it's been growing and growing and growing, like the dragon in the house that grows in the house and takes over the whole house. Yes. Because you haven't looked at it. You haven't dealt with it.
Yes.
But that if you're willing to do that heroic move builds the character. Right? This Aristotelian character, again, going back to Vervaeke, like to build the character that wisdom is using your rationality to build the character such that when the next time you face a financial issue, like I'm the kind of guy who deals with my financial issues.
Right. Totally. Yes.
And now,
absolutely. Yeah. And even just like things like I'm starting to have like investor thoughts.
Like you, since you're the kind of guy who actually deals with finances, then you might actually learn how to invest and be that guy.
Yes. And even have thoughts on his own about ideas about investment and wanting to learn and noticing things in my environment, noticing people who invest in. So there's a way that's where it kind of starts to look exponential in that respect, right? Where you start to become, you get a sense of, and I know that he talks about this in terms of, he makes a distinction different than I think the behaviorists make about this, of noticing the same thing, that where oftentimes, I know that when you deal, I think this is the same phenomenon, where when to deal with phobias, right? Oftentimes they talk about, there's the difference where what you're afraid of surprisingly bursts in versus consciously and deliberately moving towards what you're afraid of, right?
Yes.
It actually reduces the phobia. And the behaviorists, I think, talk about it in terms of that you learn how somehow not to feel anxious. But he makes a move in that, right?
Yeah.
What my understanding is he says, no, that's the wrong way of looking at it. Is that no, you see yourself as someone who can do something that's difficult, do something that's scary, right? And then because that's a change in your own self-understanding, right? You now see yourself and experience yourself as somebody who can do that, and therefore you become less and less afraid as a consequences of who you are or who you become in the matter.
And even if you don't become less anxious or less afraid,
yes,
you become more courageous.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
So even though it's scary, even though there might be anxiety there, you step up and handle it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
It becomes part of your project rather than something thrust on you.
Yeah.
Like when you go out, to get the dragon, it calls up a hunting neurology. But if the dragon attacks your city at night, then it calls up a fear and prey, right? You're either a predator or prey. And if you're going after it, then you're a predator. And that courageous, it might be scary. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I want to play with this idea of it can get infinitely better and infinitely worse.
Yeah.
Right? Because there's relative change, and then there's absolute change. And Peterson doesn't put it quite in these words, but I always like to say, imagine.
But I bet Mark Lewis does.
Yes. So I like to imagine, okay, I'm a 14th century king or noble person, a duke, right? So I'm the top, relatively, of the wealth pyramid. But in 14th century, I still don't have jack. Like, I have nothing compared to what we have today. Right? It's like my son or my daughter gets a cut and gets infected. We're probably going to have to cut off their hand.
Yeah.
Right? If we catch it in time. They might die.
Yeah.
Right? I want to hear music. I actually have to bring out a group of players, and they probably suck. and they have lousy instruments, because what kind of instruments existed in the 14th century? And I want to read something. How many people can read, and who can write, and how long does it take? Like, just so relatively, I'm at the top of the heap. But in terms of absolute wealth, the poor today have so much more. In terms of actual wealth. But today we compare ourselves to Elon Musk. Right? So there's this infinitely better and infinitely worse. And wherever we are, we habituate to it and we say that's the norm. So if we get better, that's good, but if we go backwards, that's worse. And that's true.
Yeah.
If you hide unwanted things in the fog, then you become the kind of person who hides unwanted things in the fog.
Yeah.
You become the kind of person that when the thing gets scary, you don't look at it. And I want to again offer another quote, because as a student of Ayn Rand, Ayn Rand says that the fundamental act of free will is, do you choose to focus your consciousness and take responsibility for dealing with what's going on? Or do you blank out? That's what she used to say. She used to say, do you blank out? Do you not deal with it and hide the tough things in the fog? That this is the fundamental act of consciousness and free will.
Yeah.
Like, there's all kinds of things we can't choose, but the one thing we can choose is, do we choose to be heroic? Do we choose to hide the unwanted thing in the fog, or do we choose not to? And he says, failing to look under the bed when you strongly suspect a monster is lurking there is not an advisable strategy. Such omission, such omission is the voluntary refusal of expanded consciousness.
Yeah.
Right? And in a later part, he says, to bring the light of your consciousness to the fog.
Yeah.
That there's something about choosing to do that, which is the fundamental thing in his project. It's to take responsibility. To do what? To bring your consciousness to reality as clearly as possible, as unapologetically as possible, as unwaveringly as possible. And to not hide unwanted things in the fog. And once you do that, then all of a sudden you're that hero. And now it gets better. And then that becomes your new norm. And then you can get better. And you increase your ability to be the hero. You increase your story of being the hero. And it gets better, and it gets better, and it's better. And it's always relative to where you are. Like, no matter where you are on this spectrum, like, that's where you are.
Yeah.
If you face the fog, if you bring the light of your consciousness to it, then you get better. And it might be absolutely that you're still way low.
Yeah, yeah.
But if you get better, that's the win. That's all you have to start from where you are, and you get relatively better and relatively better. And over time, you get absolutely better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. That's, and that, the start from where you are. It's interesting because I'm having, how do I put this? I'm having short little phone calls or Zoom sessions with people. And it has to do with circling from all over the world, right? That I would never meet. It's through them watching a particular video, and then they want to talk a little bit. And so I've been having these interesting half-hour little glimpses into somebody, who I would never meet otherwise, right? In a completely like different country and all that kind of stuff. And with a bunch of constraints, right? So I only have a half hour, right? So we kind of got to get to the point. There's not a lot of detail I can actually get in addressing whatever question they have to me, right? About and what there is to talk about. And I have to say, it's so interesting because I've been talking with people who basically are saying this. I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do with my life, right? I don't know what to do. And with what looks to me, with a sense in which it's kind of as if they could come up with it. Like they could think about it or something.
Yeah.
Exactly. Right? And so they've kind of come with this kind of mind fuck of in knots because they can't think of it, or anything they think of, they don't know if that's the right thing to do or not. And in this kind of sense of like being lost. And it started to strike me that, and I've noticed this, that if we say something like where to start, the place where you are, that it seems to me that they don't have much of a sense of a place, right? And it's the place where you grow up traditionally, right? Where you kind of grow up, and there's social rules. There's like there's family systems and like obligations and culture and society and necessities, and you kind of are thrown into this world that's bound with this sense of place where you are, right? That's given. And I think there's less and less and less and less and less of that, it seems to me, right? Therefore, it's not as obvious to know where to look. Like, what should I do? What ought I do? And and I think it's a combination of just reading this more thoroughly and our conversations and, all the other things too.
The one or two conversations that you're having.
Yes, absolutely. Is this sense of where, like, and this is the way it's occurred to me, something like, oh, maybe where to look for the ought is in the is, right? Where you are. And asking yourself, okay, wherever I am, I'm probably somewhere. I'm probably around some people in some situation. Where is that? And then if you just ask and look with this question, okay, what's needed? Right? What's needed? And bring your attention to actually what's happening. And I'm realizing so much of what he's talking about has to do with this, right? And so this in so many ways, right, in this chapter, and again, we want to remember too, I keep reminding myself about this, is the overarching theme of this book is beyond order, right? So it's implicitly looking at and explicitly looking at where where does order become pernicious, right? And there's these places where, I think what he's basically getting at is hedge your bets, right? There are things where you want to be willing to disrupt the order, right? And even be inaccurate, that it may be worth it, right? Because if you let certain things go for too long without addressing them, right? If you don't notice your own phenomenology, if you don't notice your own emotions and your own upsets, and you let that go in all these different contexts, right? That not saying it now becomes like, that's where, like, maintaining the status quo, if you will, right, becomes pernicious and fixed. So there's ways of kind of looking at this, and tell me what you think of this, Mark, because that sense of leaning into and noticing, noticing my moods, noticing my bad moods, noticing, right, all the things that he talked about of upsets that I have that I don't share, noticing these places where I feel dead inside, right, around a certain topic with my partner or something like that. And he's saying, bring them up, right? And there's a sense in which I'm thinking about what we talked about last time with the island, right? Where at the center of the island is the most ordered, and at the edges are like the artists and the painters and, the insane people and all that stuff, where they have a proclivity to lean out into chaos, right? To draw on the unknown. And if the order, right, if the center is deep enough, right, that new chaos that's brought in will update, right, and regenerate the center. It will renew the father, if you will, right? It will update, right, and deepen. I think, as you say, and I've heard you say, is that you want to have at the center of the island, you want to have a story that's so deep, right? It's so deep that it allows for everything that happens can be an opportunity to deepen that story, right? So everything that happens, it can deepen that story. So there's just kind of getting this kind of kinesthetic sense of, oh yeah, this is asking on a I think in some way he's saying, notice discomfort, especially in relationships, and then speak it and see what happens, right? Speak it and say what happens, and speak it right away or as soon as you know it, or speak it and ask yourself, would the other person want to know it? What I'm thinking, which is inviting a certain unknown or a certain chaos
and danger and monsters.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm just wondering, what we talked a little bit about. I was always really impressed by something that you've done in your life. I was wondering if you wanted to talk about that, like a place where you actually volunteered.
Yeah. So I should just get into that. This is.
I think you just yes.
So you suggested that you might talk with me about this.
Yeah.
So I'm prepared.
I love this.
So do not hide unwanted things in the fog. Before I get there, let me build on what you said, because admit your feelings is how he puts it. Admission. It's an interesting verb. And he put it in italics, like I've thought about the way that I'm putting this. Admit your feelings. That does not mean give in to your feelings. It does not mean allow your feelings to just come through you and act. In fact, yeah, I'm gonna do this. There's he talks about how not to do it.
Oh yeah,
right. And it's so good. He says, right, show your disappointment whenever someone close to you makes you unhappy. Allow yourself the luxury and the pleasure of resentment when something doesn't go your way. Yeah. Ensure that the person that has transgressed against you is frozen out by your disapproval.
Right.
Force them to discover with as much difficulty as possible exactly what they've done to disappoint you. And finally, let them grope around blindly in the fog that you've generated around yourself until they stumble into and injure themselves on the sharp hidden edges of your unrevealed preferences and dreams. I mean, how epic. You know, both you and I, like, we deal with people who are in relationships. And people lay out, like, here's my situation. I've done tons of relationship coaching. Sometimes it's one person saying, here's what's going on, what can I do? Sometimes it's the two of them. And this is like the exact thing. It's like, this is different than admitting your feelings to yourself, right? The fog is you hide it first from yourself, and you don't tell yourself or others. So first, admit your feelings to yourself. And then he gives a number of examples in the chapter of saying something like, so here's what I'm experiencing. This is what I think is happening, but I don't know. Maybe I'm messed up. What do you think?
Yeah.
Right? Rather than here's how it is and here's what you did. It's here's what I'm experiencing and here's what I think it means, but I'm not sure. What do you think? Admit your feelings rather than unleash your feelings. So I wanted, like, and starting from where you are, you know, he often says, like, what calls to you? What could you do that you would do? Right? What's something small enough that you could do it and you would do it, and then you kind of coax yourself to do it, because wherever you start from, every step in that direction is a win. Okay, so so with that, now, so the story that you've kind of asked me to tell is that, so I'm married, and I've been dating my wife for 19 years. We've been married 10. And we're 12. I should know that, but I don't, because I'm a very bad husband. And when she and I were dating, I was dating a lot of women. Like, I was in a very polyamorous phase in my life, and I was upfront about it. She knew all about it. Like, I was, like, everybody knew what was going on. But as I'm dealing with all of these polyamorous relationships, I'm journaling to myself to try to talk to myself about what's happening. I'm trying to not hide unwanted things in the fog. So I'm writing down, here's what I'm thinking about this person, and here's what I'm thinking about this person, and here's what I'm thinking about this, and here's what I feel, and I don't know, right? So I'm journaling to myself, to speak to myself, to try to make sense of what's going on. And and my wife and I share a Dropbox account. Right. And so she has access to all of this stuff. And so she's like, hey, I'm kind of curious about this. And I'm like, okay, why not? I give you permission to look in any of the documents in my Dropbox, and especially all the ones that say journal or notes, because that's where I take my notes. And as you know, because I was telling you about this, you're like, what? And I'm like, okay, this is just insane. But I trust her. It's why I married her. I trust her to be fair with me. And whatever she finds is going to be getting things out of the fog. Right? And so that led to...
So just to be clear, I just want to make sure, so for everyone to know it. So basically what Mark is saying is, like, if you had a journal in which you shared your deepest private thoughts with yourself, right, working your life out, if you shared that basically with your wife or your partner, right, and especially if it's about your feelings at that time about them, right,
because there's lots of entries about her
opening the book, literally opening the book, right? So impressed by that. It's so great.
And it led to, like, for years, it's been a few years now since I've done this, but you know, it would lead to, I'd be going about my day, and my wife would go, hey, you want to have a conversation? And I go, oh no, what did she find?
Yes.
What did she find? What did I write? Oh no, because it could be anything. And this is like when you don't know what it is, you have to prepare for everything, kind of thing.
Yeah. Yes.
But because I've chosen this, because we've had a lot of conversations like this, obviously, even when we were first dating, like, I was honest about my relationship pattern. So anyway, like, don't hide unwanted things in the fog allows for like an enormous amount of trust.
Yeah.
Because literally, she knows the stuff that, like, you would never, like, you wouldn't say that to someone.
Right.
Like the way that you say it to yourself in your private moments.
Yeah.
But in the process, our relationship has just gotten stronger and stronger and stronger because, like, everything is allowed.
Yeah.
And we just talk it through. But a large part of that, I'll say that, I mean, partially because I was writing a book on the subject when I started dating her, but like, how do you say, here's what I feel, here's my experience, but I'm not saying that you've done anything wrong. And I'm not saying it's the definitive way things are. What it is my best articulation at this point of my own process, which is incomplete.
Yeah.
And I'm inviting you to tell me your side.
Yeah.
With the understanding that whatever you think is fair, because it's true. Whatever you think is true, and whatever I think. And our us is this ability to negotiate both of those things.
Yes.
And so it's a little bit deep in the story, but in terms of not hiding unwanted things in the fog, and how much infinitely better can it get?
Yeah.
Right? To be in a position where, like, there's almost nothing I can say that I haven't already said. Like scary stuff that she hasn't already encountered and confronted and chosen me in the face of.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, versus the opposite of the infinitely bad, where the more you don't confront it, the more you don't want to confront it, and the scarier it gets.
Yeah.
Until and again, one of the things I appreciate about Jordan, which is, you could say, not my normal predilection, is that he's really, really comfortable saying that leads to victimhood, because now you're oppressed by the fog and all the monsters are in the fog, and your unwillingness to look at it actually becomes oppressive to yourself. You become a victim of your own, of the weight of all of the things that you haven't looked at. And then in the face of that victimhood, of that oppression, you actually become resentful and revengeful against being itself, against existence itself. Right? That's the other infinite side of it. And like my coach, I've told you this lots of times. I had a coach who used to say, "Mark, you know that thing you're doing? Don't do that." Right? It's like, okay, thanks. But it's like, or as Jordan Peterson would say, it's not good. That's not good.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. In that, just that quality of that, well, going back to what you highlighted there in the term when he says to admit, right? To admit. Be interesting to look up the etymology of that just to see the nuances of that word. But it strikes me as it's saying something that's he's not. He doesn't say honest, right? Be honest. He says admit. And so there really is this quality of he's yeah, in that way, when I admit it, and I admit it with some humility, like basically I open up to you, and I open up and I'm honest about what I know, but I'm also honest, right? And admit, right, that my view isn't the only thing going on here, right? And so it's a real openness to the other person, and I think it shows a willingness to be in some sense altered or changed by and with the relationship with the other, right? It's like, here's what's going on for me, and in doing that, I'm basically saying I'm an unknown. here's my known, probably a lot of unknown. I want to open up and share it with you. What do you think? Right? And in that moment, there's a way where there's a you come in, I let you in at a deeper level, right? Because I'm not a finished product, right? In some sense, I'm not just knowing stuff that I withheld and then sharing it, but I'm sharing what I understand, right? Implicitly inviting you, right, to not only just know but also reveal more of me, right?
To myself.
Yeah, that's exactly.
Through this willingness to admit.
Yeah, yeah.
To look into the fog and to admit what's true in my experience, whatever it is, first to myself and then to you. And again, this gets back to the first two chapters you said earlier. Like, this is about beyond order.
Yep.
Right? And the two examples he gives in the chapter, his father-in-law who eats off of small plates for 20 years. Until he finally explodes. Why are we eating the small plates rather than the big plates, right?
Yeah, yes.
Or the artwork.
Yeah.
My husband's getting artwork and furniture, and he's taken over our domicile.
Yeah.
And I don't like it, but I don't say anything.
Yeah.
And each time I don't say something, I'm going down this hiding thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Yes.
Right. And he's saying, in order to discover who you are, because you don't really know, because you're more complex than your best story about it. If you admit your feelings to your partner, to yourself first, to your partner, and he talks earlier about, the question, who are you? Who could you be? And he talks about how a lot of our thinking is done in conjunction with other people.
Yeah.
Like, it's not until I speak it and hear your response that I start to recognize what it is that I'm thinking. And so this process, another part of this chapter, he talks about the difference between naivete and faith.
Yeah.
Where it's like, if I've never been betrayed and I share, like, I'll admit my feelings because I've never had someone turn on me. I've never had someone use it against me.
Yeah.
That's one thing. But once you've shared something and other people share it outside, or they use it against you in a later conversation, or they laugh at you and shame you about this thing that you've admitted, this vulnerability. But you choose to trust them anyway, knowing that they might betray you. That betrayal is a possibility.
Yeah.
But you have faith.
Right.
Right? You have faith in the other person.
Yeah.
And you have faith that no matter what happens, it will be the best thing. As he says, you speak the truth as clearly as you can.
Yeah.
With humility, not as an attack, but with humility.
Yeah.
And then whatever happens is the best thing. That kind of faith, and that I'm going to trust you.
Yeah.
With my vulnerability. Because in doing so, I'm calling you to be your best.
Yes.
right? And perhaps
Yes.
it is only when I call you to be your best that you show up as your best, and then you help me discover who I am and who I could be.
Yeah. Yes.
But there's something about that which is certainly chaos. You're going into the unknown. You're risking. But it's only by doing that that you can upgrade the order.
Right.
Especially when the order is the fog.
Yeah.
Like the standard is, I have not talked about the plates. I have not talked about the artwork. That's the order.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I need to risk that.
As we're talking, I feel like I'm understanding more and more why I think Aristotle said that all virtues, right, presuppose the virtue of courage. Like, you can really kind of get that sense. Because it is really true, because it wouldn't be the same thing if I actually knew for sure, right? It couldn't have the possibility of growing my character, right? If I didn't know on some level that like this could all go south, I could be totally wrong. I could be wrong about you, right? But the declaration of faith, in some sense, kind of the existence, right? I'm really saying something that if I'm honest, I just trust that it's going to work out, right? Especially when it comes to when I'm honest about myself, right? That sense of vulnerability, proactive vulnerability, and opening up. That's why I was so impressed by that choice, right? All right, here, let's let you in completely, right? And all the fruit that's come out of that.
Yeah, I remember when I was choosing that, she and I were talking about it. And I said, here's my concern. What if you find something that you cannot digest? Like, are we willing to risk this somewhat idyllic relationship that we have? Right? Are we willing to risk that we might not make it through it? Maybe she can't handle it. Maybe I can't admit the truth of my feelings. That she says, hey, Mark, what about this thing? And I'm like, I'm going to lie. I'm going to pretend that she's misunderstanding when no, it's actually worse than what I wrote. This is like, and this is the part that's still there, and this is the part that's not.
Yeah. Yes.
Right.
Yes.
And are we willing to risk this relationship in order for the possibility of going deeper and like really clearing up the fog? Are we willing to risk that? Right. And I think I told you, it's like, well, let the games begin. Like, we're going on this ride. We'll see. I think it'll work out. But if it doesn't, I'm going to have faith that that's the best thing. And by the way, anybody who's watching, I do not recommend this as a course of action. Unless you have the requisite practice of having mutually vulnerable and humble conversations. Because I mean, this is why I chose her. In the end, why of all the women that I was dating, I ended up choosing her, even though I never planned on getting married. Like, the reason I chose her is because she could admit her feelings with humility.
Yeah.
Like, this is what I'm feeling. This is what I want. This is what I think. This is what I experience. And quite frankly, right, like she never backs down. Right? She just never backs down.
Right. Right.
compromise. Like
Yeah.
she's not so much a compromise person. She's a synergy person. She's like, no. I want this way.
Yeah.
Now we can work around the edges, but
Yeah.
But she does it without making me, without shaming me, and
Very graceful.
It's like
Very
she
graceful.
plays so clean. It's hard,
Yeah.
but it's beautiful. But even with all of that, I didn't know if it was going to work or not.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What did she understand in wanting that? What is from your vantage point of when she's like, no, let's do this, right? I think that's what you were talking about. What from your best guesstimation about her going like, oh yeah, I want. What is it? What does she understand about that?
So I like when you said that, a couple things came to mind. One is like she just wants to know.
Yeah.
Whenever there's something that, like, she does not hide things well in the fog. Like when there's something that she wants to know, she's just gonna. She's tenacious.
Yeah.
So you could say partially it's in her nature, but the part that kind of makes me tear up is that she thinks I'm a good person. From her perspective, she knows who I am. And so whatever she finds in those journals, she trusts that it's going to be something she can respect.
Right.
And I'm glad that what she found didn't disabuse her of that notion.
Yeah.
Right.
Totally.
That she after, right? Because I mean, obviously, I wrote those for me. I always teach my clients, like, write as raw as you can, because you going back and reading it a year later, 5 years later, 10 years later, like there's nothing more powerful than reading something raw from your past.
Right.
Like, so I wrote it for me.
Yeah.
But after having spent a couple of years where she would sometimes spend an hour or two a day just like going through and reading my shit.
Wow.
Right? She still thinks I'm a good person.
Yeah.
She still trusts me.
Yeah.
And that's...
Yeah.
And partially it's...
What is it
partially
that moves you? Huh.
Partially,
it moves you.
Partially she's generous.
Yeah.
Right? Like, again, the thing that's always been true about her, and the thing that just had me want to spend more and more time with her over time. Right? The thing that had me fall in love with her, among other things. There's something ambiguous. I say something that it could mean this or it could mean that. And if it means that, it's pretty fucked up.
Yeah.
But if it means this, well, no, it's like not great, but no, that's respectable. Like that's not a bad thing. I wish it weren't that way, but it's not bad. But if and this ambiguity, because so much of what we say is ambiguous. You could read it this way or that way.
Yeah.
And she consistently reads me to be honorable. Honorable is one of the words she uses towards me. And like, I want to be, honorable. I attempt to live my life such that I'm honorable.
Right.
And, there's always self-delusion and self-deception and and the further I go in my life, I look back and there's just so many things. It's like, oh my God, I know why I did it that way. I know why I said that thing. And what I said was honorable at the time, but oh my God, I would do it so differently now. I would, God, I'm so embarrassed.
Right.
It's not that it was wrong, and it's not, but oh God, that was, it was insensitive, it was inconsiderate, but I mean, it was honest, and I was humble, sort of, a little bit, but, right? And
right.
Well, you've known me for a long time. I've got a mouth.
Yeah, totally. And totally. I know me too.
I've got some
I know
opinions.
what you mean.
So the fact that she finds me honorable.
Yeah. Yeah.
When she's like seen my diaries.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, partially it's just
goes deep.
My love for her. Like what did I do to get so lucky to get someone who would who would read those things and still and all of the ways that she could twist it so that it was bad and wrong, and all of those ways that she could, not that they would be true, but to actually and then just, I don't know if it's validation or confirmation that what I've chosen and how I've been from the person who knows me best thinks that I'm honorable.
Yeah. There's a movedness here that I think I'm wondering about. This is why I keep asking. It seems like if we ask the movedness, it's something about what I think I'm hearing about it is this mysterious, deep thing that's hard to bring into words exactly. But I think what I'm hearing is there's a way in which her listening of you, right? I'm hearing an indebtedness, right, to the way she listens to you and has faith in you that is in some way co-generative of who you become and who you are, right? I'm imagining that's part of what you're talking about here, right? Is that sense in which in some sense I'm gonna say these things, right? That I wasn't even intending to say to anybody, only me, right? And and a lot of it is about you at that time when we first met and all the different thoughts, right? All of that, right? And in some sense, there's a way in which I can imagine the way that she responds and the choices that she makes about that, and that she said yes, and what you trust about her, right? I could imagine that listening is somebody that you married in. That's some listening that you married into, right? Like, it seems in some level, when you trust someone, when you share or admit, right, and open yourself up to another person, right, about the fog, about the things that you're noticing, right, I think it reveals there's a quality in which in admitting and sharing the way that you respond to me, right, helps me not only to see myself or to see more of what's true for me, right, but also there's a way in which part of what I'm trusting in you is that you'll actually listen from such a deep place that actually what's revealed in who I am in your listening, right, is somebody that I would want to be. I think is the sense of it. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. As you were saying that, a phrase came to mind. It's like you can't ask for that. Like to ask for that much generosity, that much care. Like to ask for that is, but to offer that.
Yeah.
To offer that thing, which is like,
yeah.
Like, would you please, in the face of this obviously ambiguous thing that could be, you could read this a lot of ways, and most of them are unpleasant, and
Yeah.
like to read it honorably, to listen to me that way, to see me that way, to choose that. Like, I can't ask, like, that's way too much to ask for.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
But the fact that she gives it to me is epic.
Right. Right. So epic.
Yeah. So I have a talk I call, I say love is the ultimate trade. And as I think about what you're saying, and like to actually put your attention on someone with the intention to find what's right about them, what's beautiful about them.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like that's the trade of love.
Yeah.
Like that's the valuable thing that you give. With the hope that they will pay in their similar coin.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's faith.
Yeah.
Because especially when you add in like household expenses and children and grandchildren and sex and jealousy and like all the things.
All the things. Huh.
Like that's...
When you said, it's so interesting, I really appreciate the thing you just said about like, I can't ask anybody for that, right? On one level, I guess on one level, there's a level which is, it's just like, that's a lot to ask of somebody, right? But it's also, I also hear it as, in a deeper way, and it's almost like physics, it's unaskable in terms of the laws of physics won't allow that to be askable, right? That there is something only that had to come from her own spirit, right? Her own, like even if you could ask, right? It can't come. It's got to be something that is so original in her, right? That like even if you could ask it. And she gave it. It's beyond it's beyond just from what you could ask for. There's something really deep in that I hear.
So as we take this and we bring it back to Jordan's main story, the main myth.
Yeah.
Order.
Yeah.
Chaos. Hero.
Yeah.
Tyranny. Monsters.
Yeah.
Villain.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Like how Jordan says over and over again, often in the context of Christ, like if you really took responsibility, if there's a spectrum between like hiding things in the fog, which leads to villainy, which is the action of villainy and leads to resentment and revenge and actual villainous behavior, versus not hiding things in the fog. Right? Tell the truth, or at least don't lie.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? And he goes through sins of commission, where you say something untrue, versus omission, where you just fail to say something true.
Yep. Yep.
Right. But the more that you are willing to say, to avoid sins of omission as well as commission.
Yeah.
That there's this heroic potential.
Yeah.
And if you go far enough out that, like, what is the actual impact on being itself, on the entirety of, like, what's possible if you really do that?
Right. Yeah.
And it's like,
really do it.
You can't even imagine what that's like until you do it. And again, getting back to John Vervaeke and his work with Paul, I don't remember, transformative experiences. Like, there are things, until I shared my journals.
Yes.
Like, I didn't know who I would be after that.
Yes.
I could not know in advance who I would be.
Yes.
And like, you can't know what's possible until you actually do the thing. Ken Wilber talks about the 3 strands of valid knowledge. Specifically in terms of religion, but in terms of any science, like, first you have to learn the experiment. Like, you have to learn how to measure. Like, you're going to do science, you have to learn, what are we going to measure? How are we going to measure it? What are the terms? What are the things? Okay, we lay out the experiment. Then you need to perform the experiment.
Yeah.
And then you need to discuss the results of that with the community of the adequate. He calls it the community of the adequate. I think he may have gotten this from Gadamer. I don't remember.
Sounds like a Godmerian term.
Yeah. So with the community of the adequate, like, people who have learned the experiment and performed the experiment, because they're the only people who can tell. And he uses the simple example of, it's raining outside.
Yeah.
Well, how do you tell? Yeah. Well, we're going to go out and I'm going to feel. And if my hand gets wet, then it's raining. Then you actually go outside and hold your hand out and it gets wet or not. And then you can compare your results with other people who've done the experiment. If you haven't done the experiment, then you're not really qualified to answer the question.
Yep.
Right? Until you have the faith, the non-naive trust, where you know that you can be betrayed, but you're willing to risk in the face of being betrayed. Like, it's not that it's not scary, it's not that it's not anxious, but you have the courage to not hide the thing in the fog. Until you do that, you don't know who you're going to be. You don't know who you are on the other side of that.
Yes.
You can't know until you do it. And that's kind of like, I can't ask her for it. It's not physically possible. Because you... Unless someone has the capacity to do the experiment, you can't demand of them that they do the experiment.
Right. Yes.
Yeah.
Because there's a choice. It's like there are to put it, I think, in what you're talking about. In other words, there are choices that you make that are choices that, in following through, in making them, will transform you, right? And by definition, right? Yeah, by definition, if you because through this, making this choice, say kids, whatever, having a family, all these different choices, I can't actually, essentially, it presupposes that I'm that someone that could know to make that. So it's a big mystery of how can we make a choice? Is it a choice, right? And I think in some sense I'm getting this in some way, it's interesting. I'm like getting this sense, this way in which people can be something like a listening from the future, right?
Yeah.
That, like there's something about, I'm going to say this into the community of the adequate, let's say, right? It's something like that, right? Of that, if I choose people and I'm intimate with people in my life that are, that in some sense, I don't know how to say it. It's in some sense I can hear what I can't imagine in myself, right? That they maybe can hear, and I speak it. So it's so interesting to look at this, because it's like every time we speak the fog, every time we just start to notice, right? And then we haven't quite talked about this too, because I think that there's another thing about, we notice the fog, right? And noticing that's not a mild thing, right? Given the amount of attention and the amount of world, like noticing is
choosing to notice and not blank out,
right?
Not refusing to notice.
Exactly. So in noticing and speaking and responding about what I noticed, right, the outcome of that will inform and educate my ability to notice and where to notice, right? I'm just appreciating just I think the sense in which that, this is one of the things Susan Campbell often refers to as a good criteria to know to the degree in which what I'm saying is really is authentic, is to the degree that I know, or like to the degree that I know that I will not know what's going to happen after I say it. Right?
Mm-hmm.
There is this thing about like noticing what's there, and it's interesting. It's one of the places, if I just admit, right? I open a domain, right? That is there in the admission. I open a domain, right? That is something like the domain that could transform me, right? It's like you're opening a dimension or a domain that's so potent, right? Or can be so potent. And if we get good, in some sense, over time in practicing this, right? And this is the other thing, is like, if I open that domain with the people in my life, and those people respond to that, and we both become more than what we could be through that, that's a good indication of who I ought to be around, right? And conversely, if I do that and it goes bad, right, and they're not up for that, that's good information. Those are probably people I ought not be around.
Yes,
right?
And if you reach into that unknown, that impossible to ask for thing, if you reach into that with someone and what you get back is shame and judgment and defensiveness, and if you, right?
Yeah.
Do you refuse to see that?
Mm-hmm.
And make that into the fog and say, that's okay, that's just part of it. I'm still going to go deeper into relationship with this person, and I'm going to set up an order where that happens, but I don't comment on it. I don't bring it up. I don't say, hey, it seems to me I did this and then you responded like that and it felt this way to me. I mean, what, like, am I reading this wrong? What's going on? Like, I don't have that.
Yeah.
Right. And if you do that and you just keep getting it back, it's like, oh, well, that's a sign.
Right.
Like, maybe you should listen to that. Maybe they're not the kind of person that you want to build your life with.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So the fog holds that kind of potential.
Yeah.
That's the heroic choice, to actually dig down into the order which is fog.
Yes.
And open it up to a chaotic entry, not knowing where it's going to go. But if you do that with courage and humility, that's the heroic choice, and that leads to the greatest possible meaning. Something like that.
Yeah, I just saw this kind of sense. I've never quite seen it like this before. This sense in which people in our lives are like, in some way, they're the local representations of one foot in the known, and they're there in some sense. They're an access point, or I don't know, a guardian or an angel or some kind of. They sit at the border. It's possible for them to sit at the border between, like, basically order and chaos. Like, at some level, that I can be really honest and admit something in relationship to them. There's a place where people can be situated right that they're like angels somehow, right?
Yeah.
Guardians, stewards, right? Like, there's something going on there that I'm picturing that I've never quite imagined in that way. More to explore.
To close on that. Perhaps, and I think Jordan would say something like this, perhaps people are that. They are angels in disguise of being normal people, like metaphorically. If we refuse to look into the fog around that person, then they show up as just the normal person they are. They are the person in our story who we already know them. We already know them because we put them in that story. But if we treat them like angels, and we admit what's in the fog with them in real time, this is circling. Right, this is circling.
Yeah.
If we admit real time what's going on with them in the fog, then they are angels, and it opens up this movement towards the magical, ultimate unknown.
Yeah.
The goodness. Yes.
Oh.
Okay. Next week, sir.
Next week, my friend. Love you, brother. Bye.
Bye. This brings us to the end of this episode of Chaos, Logos, Order, where we apply the ideas of Jordan Peterson in order to create lives of increasingly heroic meaning. With our hosts, Guy Sengstock of thecirclinginstitute.com and Mark Michael Lewis from the game of heroicmeaning.com. We're going through Jordan Peterson's new book, Beyond Order, chapter by chapter. In this episode, we went through chapter number 3, Do Not Hide Unwanted Things in the Fog. If you found this helpful and you want more, join us in our next episode as we go through chapter 4, Notice that opportunity lurks where responsibility has been abdicated. And as always, we leave you with a challenge. Make your deepest happiness your highest priority.